Fizzy, and welcome to Cryptid Classroom. On today's show, he's talking about the Ucumar. So here he is.
What is going on, all y'all? And thank you so much for jumping back on here with me. Big ups to Little Fizzy, bringing it in like a boss. And he's right. We're going to be discussing the Ucumar. What is the Ucumar, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have anything to talk about today. The Ucumar is an Argentinian and Chilean Bigfoot. They're kind of unique in the way that some of the sightings resemble running backs, 5 to 7 foot tall, big arms, big legs, big broad shoulders, and they love cabbage. They love egg rolls. I don't really know if they love egg rolls, but they do love cabbage. Payo was like an Argentinian cabbage, and people have reported that these things will come down out of the mountains to eat their cabbage. Now, there are a lot of interesting stories that revolve around the Ucumar, and it starts building from very early on. So that's where I think we should pick up. The first documented sighting of the Ucumar was in May of 1958. There was a group of campers went out in a place called Ringo in Chile, outside of Santiago. I think it's 50, 60 miles outside of it. They all report that they ended up seeing at that time a large ape man. So they call the police. They have no idea what's going on, right? So they bring the police out. Police start doing the investigation, start talking to people, and one of the campers' name was Carlos Soto. And Carlos sits down and he said, "Look, you're not going to believe this, but what I saw was a massive hair-covered man." Which is funny because a few years before this, in 1956, on the Argentinian side of the Andes Mountains, at an elevation of over 16,000 feet, a geologist was doing some work with the last name of Pitch. And Mr. Pitch ended up finding some tracks. And in those tracks, he found a very human-like footprint that was 17 inches long. That's a hell of a footprint, right? And just a year later, there's more tracks discovered in Salta, Argentina. And then, of course, not long after that, the locals in Tolar Grande started calling reporters and other folks around and reporting what they had heard was what they said sounded like eerie calls coming from the Kuru mountain area outside of their town. And I don't mean phone calls, right? We're talking about these crazy sounds. And not one, not two, but an operatic sound of both sides as it's just echoing down into these valleys. It's got to be extremely unnerving. No way around it, extremely unnerving. And a lot of people were getting frightened. And then a lot of the old locals were like, "Hey, look, it's just the Ucumar. They're just coming through this time. That's all it is. This is just the big ape men, right? We all know about this stuff." So investigators and reporters show up. They start going through all this. And what do they find? Well, they find a dead end. They find that they can't find any real proof of it, but they have all of these encounters and all of these sounds, and they even hear the sounds. And somehow that information fell into the hands of Ivan T. Sanderson. And Mr. Sanderson starts going over all the paperwork and looking at everything, trying to figure out what's going on. And what does he figure out, rather? He says, "You know what this sounds like? This sounds like the same tale that I heard from Albert Ostman back in the 20s when he was abducted, allegedly, by Sasquatch. He says that they made the same sounds as what's being reported here." Well, which is very unusual, but is it really if you're talking about a Sasquatch? They got legs, they could walk, they could move. I mean, how come they couldn't travel? So now fast forward to 2010. Here's a very interesting tale from the El Tribano in Salta, Argentina. They released this in the first part of August of 2010. And the story goes that there was a rancher and his nephew, and they had some very peculiar specimen that they came up with. Now, neither one of those men were willing to talk about it. But the nephew had a good friend named Martin, and Martin actually went to the house on a Saturday morning. And Martin says that the Saturday that he arrived, they had to explain to him what had happened that morning. So what happened, or rather that the following evening / morning. So this is what Martin relays. Martin said this, that he comes to their house. He's on the door. They invite him. They're like, "Hey, look, come on in. We got to show you this," right? Sounds like to me Martine was coming over to work cattle. That's where the story ends up going later. So Martine shows up. He says, hey, look, there is something back there on their back porch they show me that's tied by its feet, hanging up there, dead. Its hands are tied, and it stretches from the ceiling to the floor. It's that big. So Martine says, I asked my friend, what is this? What the hell's going on? I asked the uncle, what the hell is this? They can't explain. They go, dude, we don't know. We have no idea, but we thought it was a goblin. This is what we thought this thing was, a goblin. So the story goes like this. They were going to work cattle that Saturday morning. They needed to do some branding. They had a lot of stuff they needed to get done with their herd. So they are out gathering cows that Friday. During this time, they're looking around, right? Everything's going good, and they start hearing this sound. And they said it's hit or miss. It's bouncing around. Then it gets increasingly loud. So much so that the nephew says it's almost deafening. He said, you can tell this sound is disrupting the herd. It's making things nervous. Stuff's not going right. He said, and it's getting dark. By this time, it is like dark. So they make their way back to the house. They're freaked out, the uncle and the nephew. Martine's not there, mind you. He's just relaying what he was told. So the uncle and the nephew, they get a gun. They get the flashlights, spotlights. They head back out. And they are looking everywhere for this sound of this thing, right? They're shining their lights. They're looking. They're going crazy. Eventually, they go where they know this sound was. They get it on there. They get the lights out there, and they see two big glowing eyes. Green, glowing eyes. They freak out, right? They just want it gone. The nephew says, the first thing they think of is goblin. Oh, it's a goblin. What are we going to do? So they start shooting. Now, they claim they were just going to scare it away. Funny thing is, they hit it right in the face. They shoot this thing like in the cheek, right? Down it goes. So they gather it up. They bring it back. Martine gets out there the next day on that Saturday. Like we said, safely to assume he was coming to work cattle. Martine said after they see it hanging there, he doesn't know what to do. He's asking the questions where it come from. The uncles know it. All of them are like, dude, we don't know what this is. So the uncle finally says, this is what we got to do. Y'all got to get rid of it. He said, go out to the feed room, grab some feed sacks. Let's get rid of this thing. He said, because I'm afraid there's going to be revenge taken. Martine says, revenge? The nephew's like, Unc, what are you talking about? Revenge? The uncle says, I think this is a baby. He said, I think this is a cub. This is a cub Ucumar. He said, what we need to do to prove what we have is you need to cut its head off, which is what they did. They cut the head off of this thing. And he said, you need to dispose of the body. It's easier for us to hide the head, but we do not want to keep this thing here in case they come back. And they come back aggravated. Now, the head measures 15 centimeters. They said the animal overall was probably 60 to 70 centimeters tall. And Martine was asked, what did y'all do? Martine straight up says, hey, look, we did exactly that. We cut the head off of it, put the head away. I'm sure they threw it in the freezer. And they said they go to the feed room. They get about a bunch of burlap sacks, and they put this thing in the sacks. They wrap it all up, almost sounds like a mummy, whatever. And they load it up. And he and the nephew go up into the back country and find them a good canyon, and they sling this thing off in the canyon. So they asked Martine, describe what you saw. He said, it's very simple what I saw. He said this thing had fingers and toes that were very man-like, and it was covered in short black hair, and it had very large incisors. Its canine teeth were very big, very thick. And he said, the truth is I've never seen anything like it before or since. He goes, but what we did was carry it up there and cast it off into that canyon. Now, he said, I've hunted my whole life in this area. I've spent all my life in the woods, grew up through here and played. And he said, I have found a lot of very strange and interesting things. But he said, there are only certain areas that you will find where these things, these Ucumar, have been rubbing. He said they rub against trees, like other animals rub against trees. He said the only difference is this hair doesn't match anything else that you find like that. He said you can find, cattle hair or anything else that might be, but this hair doesn't match anything. The way it rubs, where it's at, the height off the ground, all these things. He goes, so I don't know what it is. Makes me sound like makes me think that Martine may have more hair samples. I don't know. You can go right now and pull it up, and you can take a look at this head. It's all over the interwebs. Well, y'all pull it up, take a look at it. You will see it. But there's something that needs to be noted, that when describing what this Ucumar allegedly looks like, one of the key features is it has small, beady eyes, and it has very thick arms and thick legs. That's not what Martine describes. That's not what the nephew or the uncle describes. And that is not what this photo you will see of this Ucumar head looks like. It looks like a monkey. Not an ape, but a monkey. I don't know what kind. Shockingly enough, I'm not a primatologist. I hope one of y'all are. I don't know what this thing is, but it does look, it is primate, but it doesn't look like anything other than a monkey. That being said, it could easily be just mistaken. Maybe its body was different. Maybe it was a little one. And of course, it's not grown into its size. There's a lot of what ifs, what it could have been. But it does sound like whenever they tell the story, the descriptions, and the actions of an Ucumar, that it's more Sasquatch, more like the Bigfoots of North America than something that we don't know what it is. It sounds more like that than it would be like a monkey. But the bulging eyes, you'll notice it when you see that picture of this thing. You will say, hey, look, there's the bulging eyes. Could it have been bulging because that's where it was shot? Of course it could. Could it have been bulging because that's what it was? Of course it could. But it just doesn't really fit that. But that is the one explanation that I could find where they had a body. They have something that they could go test. I can't find out if it was tested anymore. I don't know what they've done with it. Either way, that's the story of the Ucumar. If you're interested in more, there are tons of stories of the Ucumar in that part of the world, and it's very fascinating. And speaking of fascinating, I'm fascinated that y'all stayed. Thank you so very much. I appreciate you being here. Big ups again to Little Fizzy. I'm going to turn it back over to him, let him go ahead and show us out. We'll catch you here next week on the Cryptid Classroom. I'll have some more doozies coming up. Y'all take care. Peace.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. So hit the bell, like, and subscribe. That's all, folks.